Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so my goal right now is to cover all of the games from the first round for the knockout for Wesley So versus Hikaru Nakamura. I already did one on the game that Wesley So won in the second round. I thought it was like the most exciting one to do a video on, so I definitely wanted to get that one first. So I have the first round game, or the first game from the knockout from today. I believe they're playing the second round tomorrow, so we'll see how that goes. But if you guys are ready, let's go ahead and jump into the game and see what we have here. All right, so let me get this right here. Then switch it over. Bam. Okay, cool. So we have E4. All right, so we have E5. All right, so we have bishop to C4. And we have knight to F6, D3, knight to C6. So we have a little variation going away from the typical, well, not the typical, but the Juco piano or the Juco pianissimos. We're kind of showing a little bit of a variation here, which, I mean, it still could kind of go into that. I mean, if you have like bishop to C5 coming and stuff like that. But all right, so we have bishop to C3. All right, so bishop to B4. So we just have a straight up bishop's opening. All right, so we have knight to F3. Not worrying about the doubling of the pawns over here. The good thing, if we just kind of show a side variation real quick, the good thing about it is if you did give up the knight here, B takes C3. You have some really good central control. The knight doesn't really have anywhere to jump into, and so you'd have to push something like D5. But even after that, I mean, the bishop can always either, pin here or come back. And, it's just, yes, you have double pawns here, but, the good thing about it is, like I said, it's giving you some really good control. So a lot of the times when you're, probably in general, you don't really want to double your pawns. But, if you can definitely have some trade-offs, if you can get some type of compensation for trading your pawns off, then, like I said, that's always a good thing. So backing up here, what we have. So we have D6. Just clearing the way for the bishop to come out. So we have A3, so Wesley doesn't want to see any of the bishop G4s, coming, pinning that knight down. In this particular position, it's kind of annoying because it's really, really hard for you to try to unpin this bishop or unpin this knight, because the knight hasn't come here and you haven't pushed D4, so you don't have a possibility of putting the queen here, sidestepping that pin. So the pins in these particular positions can be very, very annoying and hard to break here. All right, so we have knight to A5. All right, so bishop back to B3. All right, so we have castles for black, castles for white. So we have C6, making sure that, like I was saying before, we don't have any of the knight jumps, causing any trouble here. All right, so we have knight back to E2. All right, so knight takes B3, A takes B3. And so, like I said before, I mean, anytime you're going to be doubling your pawns, you want to get some type of compensation for it. You don't want to just have really, really horrible double pawns and you just get nothing in return. So, I mean, at least you do have an open file in this case. So it's going to be a little bit harder for, for black to try to, uncoil their pieces here. And you constantly have pressure coming on this A7 pawn or wherever it moves to. All right, so we got bishop to A5. All right, so knight to G3. Got H6. Black doesn't want to see any of the bishop G5s coming on their own. Because like I said before, it's a little bit hard to try to break that pin down. All right, so we got knight to H4. So bishop back to C7. All right, so knight H to F5. So we got D5. Queen to F3. King to H7. This is a very useful move. Because, of course, if you did have, if you did try to push the G pawn here, of course, it's just going to drop that pawn. And with everything just kind of trained onto, this side of the board with this knight over here able to jump, the queen over here, the bishop coming, like you definitely don't want to, cause that type of damage to your structure here. So we got knight to H5. And this is, it's a tricky situation. I mean, of course, if you allow knight to take here, at some point. You know, you can see queen coming over here, and I mean, there's not a whole lot you can really do to defend against this, you know, this h6 square here. And you know, black is in this particular position, black is a slightly underdeveloped. It's not like they're, you know, they're losing or anything, but you know, they still need to get their bishop out. They still need to try to get their rook out, and their queen needs to come out. So, you know, as you can see, white only really needs, you know, bishop to d2 or bishop to e3 before they're completely done. So, you know, white is a little bit ahead in this particular position here. All right, so we have g6. Seeming like it's a little fork situation, but you do have knight to f6 with check. Queen takes f6 and knight to d4, which of course seems like it's kind of putting the knight in a on pre. But you know, the queen is undefended, so you're just taking advantage of the fact that, you know, the queen, you know, of course you can't just take here because the queen drops. So you know, in case we have a knight takes here, we'd have the knight taken back here. And you know, just keeps everything nice and solid. So it's a nice little kind of like, you know, in-betweener move here. It's definitely one of the best. I mean, you definitely don't want to go, you know, knight to g3 and, you know, compromise your structure that way. And then you have the bishop coming on this pawn here. So this is definitely the best way to kind of go about it. And so we do have queen to d6. Queen to d6. I mean, it's a completely direct threat. You know, we got the bishop and the queen both lined up on this h2 square. So of course, you know, if white just says, hey, you know, I don't care about all that, and does this, you take here and you got like lines open. So, you know, of course, the most natural move is going to be knight to e2. So then we have f5. It might seem kind of curious in this particular position because the king is kind of over here just, you know, kind of by itself. But, you know, you don't really have the coordination with the white pieces good enough to really launch a legitimate attack against the black king. So even though you are kind of opening up your own king, like I said, I mean, you have this bishop here, but you have so many pawns that can just pretty much blunt whatever white would try to do. This rook isn't really super in it. This rook isn't really super in it. So, you know, you don't really have to be too, you know, too wary of, you know, attacks as black here. So we have e takes f5, and then we have bishop takes f5. So it looks kind of scary. So if you look at the situation now, you know, black has pretty much achieved, you know, full development. You know, they actually have kind of turned the tide on you know, white here, because white still has their bishop back here, their rook is kind of back here. Yes, it's on an active file, but you know, white is slightly behind here. And so black has pretty much solved all their problems. So if you want to go ahead and pause the video real quick and see what white played here. You know, personally, it looks a little scary though, you know, with this rook being right on the opposite of the queen. So yeah, like I said, if you want to go ahead and stop the video real quick and see what, you know, white actually played here, I'll give you a couple seconds here. All right, cool. So now, as crazy as it looks, despite the danger of the situation, knight to g3 was what was played in the game, and it's actually the best move for the position. It might seem kind of crazy because you're thinking like, man, I mean, the bishop can literally just discover an attack on the queen and move anywhere, right? But see, the problem is, you know, you don't really have any good discoveries though. So let's say, for example, like, I mean, you know, of course, if you just take here, you know, that's going to just be like, you know, it's a completely one piece. It doesn't really discover an attack. So the only logical thing in the situation is actually to go bishop takes h3. Now it's really interesting because even though it does seem like it wins you a pawn because, you know, you're discovering an attack on the queen here, the thing about it is white has a Zwitch and Zug move of their own, so it's not really a true discovery. And so, you know, white has queen to e3. So queen e3, I mean, it's just the most direct threat is to, you know, take on h6 with check, force the king to move up this way. But then what it's also doing, it's also, you know, threatening this bishop because, you know, the bishop is currently on pre. So, you know, the bishop would have to retreat somewhere. So, you know, a lot of times, you know, when you're playing against somebody and you see a discovered attack, you know, on one of your pieces, you have to calculate if that discovery is going to be, you know, legitimate or not. And in this particular position, it wasn't a life and death. It wasn't a super legitimate discovery here. So and this actually hurts black's position quite a bit, and we'll kind of get in and see what we kind of see after some moves here. All right, so the bishop will probably drop back to d7, probably the safest square for it to go to. And then it clears the way for this rook to be able to kind of come in here. But it's a queen to h6 check, like I said, forcing the king to g8. And we actually see a rook lift to a4, and it's this is pretty strong, because the king is almost stalemated here. So this rook lift over here is causing quite a bit of trouble here. So we see rook to f7, just making sure that we defend against any checkmates here on h7. And so we see the rook swing over to h4. We see queen to f6, making sure that we we protect this h8 checkmating square. Probably something like bishop to e3. And as you guys can see, white's problems more or less solved. Of course you can't attack here with the pawn, because that's just gonna leave a nice little juicy square for the knight to come into. So as you can see, the tide has turned a little bit in white's favor in this particular position. So you definitely don't want to give white white this type of active play here. So like I said, we did have knight to g3, and so we see e4. And e4, there's quite a few things that e4 are doing. e4 is clearing this diagonal for these pieces, like I said before, queen to h2 checkmate. And it's trying to make a discovery on the queen a lot more true. So we see d takes e4, bishop takes e4. So now we have a legitimate discovery. And of course you can't take here with the knight, because it's kind of pinned down to the the protection of this. Well, I mean, it's kind of pinned down as far as this. If it moves, that diagonal becomes clear for the for the pieces that deliver checkmate. So we'd see the side move queen to e3, and so h5, just trying to see if we can try to knock this knight away somehow. All right, so we see c4 and king to g8. All right, so we see c5. Trying to knock the queen around a little bit. So we see queen to e5. We see f4, just further knocking the queen, and we see knight takes e4. So we see pawn takes e4, and then we see the rook lift from earlier, rook to a4. And both sides are, they're doing pretty equally. They're definitely doing pretty equally. You kind of have this isolated pawn here for black. That's going to be a little hard to defend. And then white has their own issues and stuff like that. But a major issue in the position is black is completely developed, and his bishop still doesn't really have a full home to go to. So that's something that's kind of important here. And so in the game we see rook to f5. Just giving a double attack on this pawn here, which is really kind of hard to defend, because you don't want to push b4 here, because you're just gonna block your rook, and the rook lift is pretty much pointless. But an interesting variation would have been rook a to e8. Actually just giving away the pawn on a7, giving a nice little counter attack with bishop to b8. Rook would come back down to a1, and then we'd see g5. And you definitely don't want to take here, because you would run into something like this with bishop to h2, and it would deflect the king away from the protection of this rook. And that was the more important thing with the rooks not being fully connected. So that's why you always want to make sure your rooks are connected, when you're developing your pieces. But like I said, we'd have g5, and then g3 would be the good thing to cover, and then you see h4. So if you can see here, even though you are down a pawn, the attack for black is going very, very well. And it's the main reason why is because, like I said, these rooks are not connected, and this bishop is really not active at the moment. So you would still need at least probably 2 moves to activate it in some kind of way. So you definitely have some compensation for being down that piece there. So like I said, we do have rook to f5. So we go ahead and take rook takes e4. And so we got queen takes c5, pinning the queen to the king here. So we go ahead and trade queens. Queen takes c5, rook takes c5. And we got the pig on the 7th now, rook to e7. And so we got a nice little trickaroo here, trying to see if like I said, Wesley so falls asleep and forgets that it's a discovered attack going on. And of course he doesn't, because he's the level that he is. And so we see bishop to e3 attacking the rook. So we see rook to b5. Bishop takes b6, rook takes b6, and we see f5. Trying to create either a pass pawn or just some holes in the black position here. So we see rook to f8, and we see f6, And so we see rook to f7, we see rook to e8, we see rook back to f8, rook back to e7, rook to f7, rook back to e8 with check, rook back to f8, and then we see rook to e7. And it is in this position that the players do draw by repetition, threefold repetition. And so something else that you can kind of like maybe possibly do when you do move rook to f7 and you got rook to e8 checking. Another possibility, which still ends up being a draw, is going to be, you know, king to a7. And then of course, you know, you would try to do this. I mean, of course, if you have trades, I mean, that pawn is just going to, you know, score a touchdown. So, you know, you would just pretty much just move king back. And so you pretty much just keep getting in the same, you know, scenario. And then that would be a draw as well. So that is the round. That is the first game of the knockout between Wesley So and Hikaru Nakamura. And so I'm going to be doing the third and fourth rounds in that series. So I appreciate you guys stopping by. Go ahead and subscribe and like. Leave me some comments, you know, positive or negative. You know, they're always appreciated. And you know, they can either you know, motivate me to do better, or you know, just give me fuel for continuing to you know, do what I do. So I appreciate you guys, and I will see you guys next time. I appreciate it.